I had no idea a $12 ride could turn the rest of my night into something I replay in my head with my hands trembling. You think you're just getting home. You think the app will tell you everything you need to know. And then, in the space between the back seat and the rear view, everything feels wrong all at once, because the driver is already looking at you like he's been waiting for you. It was late. I'd been at a friend's tiny rooftop, the kind that smells like too much perfume and spilled champagne and someone's cigarette smoke tangled with city air. We'd laughed too loudly, taken too many pictures, and at some point a slice of bravado met a chewy brownie someone swore was just a little edible. I didn't go to bed. I went for the door and grabbed my phone and tapped the rideshare icon like it would put the night back into neat little boxes. I remember the car pulling up and the way the dashboard light hit the driver's jaw in a yellow rectangle. He opened the door for me, and his drawl, slow, molasses thick, folded across the empty space beside me. "Evenin', hon," he said, like I'd arrived at exactly the right scene in a movie he'd already seen. He smelled like an old leather wallet and too strong cologne. He was chatty right away, but not the small talk you expect. He skipped weather and traffic and dove into something else, a story about living off the grid, about bunkers, about how the end of the world came in stages if you knew what to watch for. I was already weirdly fragile. The edible was working through me like fog. The world had softened. Faces and storefront signs and the little orange GPS path looked like watercolors. I tried to focus on my home address in the map app, on the names of the streets. My mouth felt thick and my hands weren't steady. The driver, who'd confirmed my name, or at least what should have been my name on the app, kept steering the conversation. He asked eyes-rolling questions that sounded harmless until they weren't. "You ever think about what people don't want to tell ya?" he asked. "A lot of folks got bunkers, sweetheart. Real bunkers." His voice slowed, as if he were savoring the phrase. When he reached under the seat and offered me a bottle of water, my brain did that panic check where you try to line up memory against what's happening. Why is he reaching under his seat? Why is he offering me anything when I asked for the route home? I said no, politely. I said I was fine. He laughed and pulled out a little pill bottle. The cap clack sounded louder than it should have, and said, dead casual, "If you need something stronger, I got a friend who candles the rooms out there." He started pointing at places on a map on his phone, places that weren't on my route, places with names that put little pulls of fear into my chest. Bunkers, Kandahar, words that had no business in a Wednesday night trip across the city. He missed my exit. It's a small thing, missing an exit. It can be a GPS recalculation, a lane change, a moment's distraction. But when your insides are already loose from something you swallowed for fun, when you're watching the blue dot on the map glide past where you said to turn, it isn't small anymore. My head darted up. "That's my exit," I said. The way I said it was thin, practiced in my head, firm, clear, not the slurry complaint of someone who'd been drinking. He smiled that slow smile again, like a man explaining a plot twist, and said, "We'll swing around, you'll see." He drove faster than felt safe. Not recklessly, but like someone who believed time was something to be negotiated. Every time the car lurching forward bruised the little safety I was trying to hold on to, my heart kicked. I reached for my phone to start recording, a reflex more than a plan, and my fingers felt clumsy. When the record button finally lit up, you could hear my hand breathing, the city murmuring outside, and his voice curling the edges of the microphone. "You ever think about how everything's a little off?" he said, into the small, bright world of the app. "People don't figure out the signs until it's too late." He began to escalate. He prodded with stories of weapons, of opium and strange trade routes, and then, without the kind of apology that fits into a conversation, he asked if I'd ever consider coming out to see his place. "We got food, we got friends, ain't nothing to worry about," he said, like he was advertising a guest house. The seat next to me pressed colder through my jeans. I can still remember the smell, a thick, greasy scent mixed with the cologne, and the way his thumb drummed on the steering wheel like a metronome counting down. I turned up the recording volume. I told him, slowly, that I needed to be home. I told him I was going to a friend's apartment and that I had people waiting. My voice sounded steadier in the recording than it felt in my chest. He laughed soft and said, "Rides are expensive, babe. Why not stay for a minute?" I said no again. I told him the address out loud, the whole address, hoping the GPS voice would be a backup witness to my sanity. He took another turn, one that didn't make sense. The GPS recalculated like a small animal startled. I pressed my thumb into the seat as if it could anchor me. "Take the next left," I said, because the next left was exactly what would get me to a strip of apartments I knew, my exit. Right there. He looked at me with those slow eyes and shrugged. "We're gonna go around," he said, and there was a finality that removed my ability to bargain. The map veins on my screen began to shrink away from my destination. My panic didn't feel like the dramatic surge you see in movies. It felt like a tightness under the sternum that made breaths short and deliberate and clever. I thought about the people who told me to use your voice and make noise, and realized that at that moment, making noise felt dangerous in a way that no one can tell you in advance. He was a full car length ahead of me. I could have opened the door and slid onto the gutter, but the vehicle's motion, the lock of that door, the fact that he had actual control over the speed, made that option something only for people in action films. So I did what I could. I kicked the back of his seat. The first time it went unnoticed, except for a tiny scoff. The second time, harder, it got his attention. He turned to the rear view and cleared his throat and said, Now, there's no need for that." I called someone. I don't remember who at first. I sounded like a windpipe. There are these halos in your memory where you can almost watch the sound leaving your throat. I called a friend and kept the call alive like a thread between two safety points. My friend's voice in my ear was a tether. I texted my roommate the live location link, sending it like a small, desperate confession into the light. When I finally shouted, and by shout I mean a jagged, honest howl that surprised even me, it startled him enough to snap toward the wheel. "You're scaring me," he said, and his voice dropped lower and more amenable. He braked hard, and the car leaned into the turn. For a breath, I thought he was going to stop and let me out, but he kept driving. Not far, not toward my building, toward a dimly lit apartment complex 2 blocks away that I didn't recognize as mine. That's what predators do in the movies, I thought, and then I realized this moment felt like a movie where the script had been ripped up. I don't remember the exact pattern of thoughts after that, only actions. I fumbled the door handle. It wasn't locked. He'd kept the door unlocked the whole time. I threw it open, not quietly, and stepped into the parking lot. My legs felt wrong, like they'd been borrowed from someone else. He shouted my name, a variation of my name, as if he were claiming me as his own. I ran to the building and pounded on the intercom, and a woman inside the lobby, a neighbor, opened the door, startled, and let me into a small, humming vestibule. I remember him pulling the car into a space and idling, like he was deciding what to do next. I remember the silhouette of his head in the orange streetlight through the glass. I called the number of the ride in the app and reported him. I told the support chat the bones of what had happened, and they replied with the kind of corporate gentleness that sounds like empathy but reads like process. "We're sorry this happened," the message read. "We're looking into it." It felt like being told there was a rain delay for a concert you were thrown out of. I filed the complaint, posted a brief note about my location to a friend group, and sat in the lobby with my hoodie wrapped around my face until someone came to pick me up. In the aftermath, I did the things people tell you to do after you've been shaken. Screenshot the ride details, sent them to friends, uploaded the weird recording I'd managed to capture. I called the non-emergency line to ask about what I should do next, and the person on the other end of the line spoke in calm slices about reports and investigations and timelines that could take days or weeks. I felt gratitude, small and hot, toward the neighbor who'd left her porch light on and toward the friend who'd answered when I called. I felt rage, too, Not at anyone in particular, but at my own vulnerability and at this system that sends us into strangers' cars at night like it's a normal arrangement and then treats complaints like suggestions for future data points. That's the first one. It's the one that still makes my chest tighten when I smell old leather or hear someone speak in slow cadence on late-night radio. It's the one where the edible hadn't simply made me giggly, it stripped some of my reflexes and left me softer in places I didn't even realize could be soft. It taught me that you can be careful, you can check the plate, you can keep your apps open, you can say your address out loud, and still end up in a small, dangerously ordinary scene. If you want more real rideshare horror stories like this, subscribe. That was one. Here's another that's different in shape but similar in its ability to curdle your sense of safety. This next one is about a 19-year-old who thought she could handle herself because she'd done this before. She was new in town and made the mistake of thinking that youth is a kind of armor. She'd been out with a coworker, had a few too many drinks, and when the night folded into the chilly outside air, she called a ride, and, on a dare to herself, or a habit, sat in the front seat. Sitting up front changes the dynamic. You can look at the driver, you can make eye contact, you can assume that seeing is safety. But predators aren't often men in trench coats shouting their intent. They're the ones who can swing from complimentary to creepy in the span of a sentence. He drove with the radio too low, like he was saving his voice for something else. At first, it was the kind of flattery people say to make conversation. "You're beautiful," he'd say. "You remind me of my mom." Those two lines together shouldn't land the same way, but they did, like a hand at your back that's polite but firm. She froze, because you can't punish charm, it disarms you. He'd alternate the compliments with small questions about her plans, and, because she was young and the night had left her loosened, she answered. She told him an address that wasn't the address. She told him the one she used to give because she thought it would keep things short. He nodded as if he believed her. And then, he drove the wrong direction. At first, she thought maybe the GPS had glitched. Maybe he'd taken a new route. It's small inconsistencies that creep up on you, like a song in the wrong key. He leaned over the wheel and smiled, and the smile didn't reach his eyes. He told her a story about his house being nearby, begged, half joking, "Why don't you come by for a cup of tea?" "A cup of tea," he said, like he was offering hospitality. She felt the edges of a decision start to harden inside her, to refuse, to demand, to make noise. "No," she said. The word came out thin. He didn't stop. He drove slower, pointing at a row of houses under orange sodium lights. "It's just a street over," he said. "Come on now, you'll be fine." There was a moment where the car rolled into a residential loop, and she could see that the world had been rearranged. The GPS on her phone had recalculated into a web of unfamiliar side streets. Her thumb found the seatbelt buckle and clicked it closed like a tiny island of control. She used the app to update her driver's name to a friend, sent screenshots of the route, and tried to keep her voice conversational. Nothing about the scene felt right. Her stomach clenched. "Just get me home," she told him. Her voice grew more forceful. The driver's face, already too friendly, tightened. He slowed the car to a crawl. For a small breath, he folded his hands on the wheel and said, "I liked you. Thought we could talk more." That line sounds ridiculous when you read it, but in the moment, it's a warning bell. He kept glancing over. He parked absurdly close to the curb, and when she told him again to let her out, the way he hesitated made her think he might not open the door. She didn't get out. She kept asking, louder. She told him she'd call someone. She kept sending the live location. It's strange how these small ritualistic actions can feel like stakes you bet with your own life. The screenshot, the tap of the map app, the readouts to friends. For 20 minutes, minutes that slow down in your memory into a long strip of tarmac and orange light, she kept insisting. Eventually, because of something in his face or something in the way he liked the sound of being obeyed, he put the car back on course. He dropped her off a block away from her supposed address and drove off like nothing had happened. When she reported him the next day, the rideshare platform replied with the same gentle template. We take these reports seriously. Thank you for notifying us. She told me that it felt like an email from a company that sells comfort but hadn't thought about culpability. She was shaken, and she kept replaying the "reminds me of my mom" line because it seemed to be a tool, an attempt to create trust, and that felt rotten in a particular way. I told this story sometimes in the voice of a friend rather than recounting it, like it had happened to me, because I wasn't there in that car. But being close to someone who sits in that space and comes out of it intact but changed is almost the same as surviving it yourself. You learn, as an observer, that creeps don't always escalate into violence. Sometimes they stop at the boundary, and you only notice how close they came when you're watching a replay in your head. She learned something small and sharp that I came to hear repeated a lot in these stories. Say no. Insist. Put your foot down, physically and verbally. Make it uncomfortable for them. Use your friends as anchors. The lines are simple to say in a kitchen at 2 in the afternoon. They're harder to perform under streetlights and pressure. And yet, even with that lesson, the part that gnawed at both of us later was why these men thought they could make decisions for someone else in their passenger seat. Why did the back of a car feel like the last place where a stranger's appraisal had more weight than your own voice? I was still chewing that question clean when the next story landed in my life, and it was the kind that rearranged how I think about being watched. She was walking toward her building, late, carrying a grocery bag and a shoebox of something she'd bought off an impulse sale, and there were 2 cars idling across from her door. One was hers, the one she'd ordered, and the other was an older sedan that didn't belong there. The imposter car pulled up first. The driver barked loud and commanding, as if he was announcing himself to someone he knew. He used a name that wasn't hers, and in that single second, her brain did the thing it is supposed to do. It checked. When the name came out of his mouth wrong, the hair on her arms rose. She took a step back. She told the story later like it was a film freeze frame. The wrong syllables, the tightened grip on a grocery bag, the clattering of keys. She asked him to confirm the license plate. He hesitated, gave a name, an account that didn't line up. During those 20 seconds, 20, which can be an eternity, she felt the world close into decisions. Bolt for the light and the people, or walk toward the car that matched the app and trust the app's tiny blue dot. Her throat went dry. She scanned the blocks for something to wedge herself into. Then the real ride finally arrived, lights blinking and official in the way an actual driver looks when he knows his business. She leapt into the back seat of the right car like someone taking a life raft. The driver of that car, calm, solid, spun the wheel, peeled out gently enough to look casual, and didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the intersection. She told him afterward that she could taste adrenaline for hours. She tipped him the way people tip lifeguards or firefighters, not extravagantly, but with the kind of gratitude that wants to make tangible what had been intangible a moment before. She reported the imposter through the app, and the rideshare company asked for screenshots and details, then assured her they were reviewing the report. The sensation of being checked for identity, of having to prove you belong to your own ride, is something that lingered. These stories start to accumulate like small bruises. They teach you to look for the wrong syllable in a name, the way a smile doesn't quite meet the eyes, the way the world opens and closes in a driver's rear view. They make you paranoid in the cleanest sense, toward vigilance as a form of care. I was still thinking about that when the worst one happened, the highway thing, and I remember feeling like each previous night had taught me a tiny new reflex. Check the plate, record a snippet, sit in the back, text someone the live location. But you can do all the right things and still have the wrong outcome. You can still end up in a car where the driver behaves like he owns the next stretch of freeway. I'd been taking an evening shift once a week at a bar on the edge of the industrial part of town. It was the kind of place with neon beer signs and sinuous cigarette smoke, and the sort of customers who'd leave their problems at the door for a couple of hours. I was tired, and my bones felt like a book that had been read and folded too many times. I ordered a ride, and because the app said 5 minutes, I stepped outside and waited under the sodium light. The car that pulled up looked fine. It had the generic black interior and a little dashboard tree that someone had twisted into a knot. The driver had sunglasses perched on his head like he was ready to go on a road trip. He confirmed my name and the route, and I slid in, more exhausted than careful. The city unclipped behind us, and we started on the highway. At first it was quick and boring. We moved through lanes, the radio muttered, the driver hummed along with a song. Then things shifted. The driver's hands began to twitch at a speed that made me take notice. He kept changing lanes in ways that weren't about moving faster so much as about testing space, about finding a rhythm in which he could be unpredictable. When I asked him to slow down, he said, "Oh, don't worry, I know this road." His smile was too eager, like someone who'd been given permission to try something dangerous. He started driving faster. His foot pressed the gas like he wanted to feel something, the car becoming a machine to produce a single sensation. 60, 70. He kept joking about it. "We'll get you there quick, doll." And those jokes became pressure. He refused to take my calls when I tried to tell friends the make and model, and when I told him I needed to stop, he laughed and said he'd get me to the hospital if anything happened. That laugh, that deflection, was a weapon. I called 911. My voice was steady enough. I learned later how necessary that steadiness was. The dispatcher was clipped and calm, and I did something I'd never thought to do before. I told her I was in a rideshare and that the driver was driving dangerously and not stopping. She asked me to stay on the line and to try to keep him talking so she could triangulate my position. Her voice over the phone felt like a rope, thin but holding. "He's speeding," I told the dispatcher. I didn't want to say anything that would make him suspicious, so I said safe things. "I'm fine. I'm just trying to get home. I'll keep talking." The dispatcher told me to show my hand out the window when an unmarked officer approached, to wave, to smoke a cigarette out the window as a signal. It sounds ridiculous, typed like that, a metaphor as method, but those coded instructions were a lifeline. I kept repeating the name of the road and the nearest mile marker because the dispatcher needed something to lock onto while the siren did its geometry. He started to ask questions about where I was from, why I went out, his voice turning from playful to inquisitive in the same beat. The more he probed, the more my options felt like doors someone had locked behind me. He refused to stop at exits. He explained things like it was all for theatrics. "Just trust me," as if trust could be demanded and not earned. The speedometer climbed. I felt the car hum underneath like a caged animal. I could see the headlights of other cars in the periphery, wave after wave of normal people going home. I called out to one driver at a red light at an exit ramp to point me, to signal help, but I had to be careful. You have to be specific when you're making a call for help inside a car that's moving. Vagueness could mean being unhelpful, but specificity could make your situation worse if the driver suspected you were flagging for aid. The dispatcher asked me to look for the kind of signposts that don't move, billboards, the name of a construction site, the pattern of a guardrail. I kept repeating them until my voice was raw. The driver noticed I was talking more and turned to me, eyes bright in the dash glow, and said, "Who you yelling at?" I smiled and kept the call low. He laughed like nothing was wrong and hit the gas. Police eventually met us. Lights flashed, not at me at first, but at other cars. A squad car peeled in front of us and blocked the exit. He swore and cussed and slowed long enough for officers to surround the car. They asked me to keep my hands visible and to slide out like I belonged in that world. When the doors opened and officers took over, the flood of relief was so sharp I felt dizzy. They put me in the back of a cruiser and drove me to a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and hotel soap. They took my statement, and someone walked me through a checklist that felt clinical next to the raw edges inside me. Later, when the doctors asked me about substances, about whether I'd been drugged, about everything that could make you feel like someone else had been steering your body, I noticed I didn't have all the answers. The important thing was that I'd used the resources I could: the phone, the dispatcher's coded instructions, the willingness to talk. In the police report, there were details and notes and procedures. On the outside, the Rideshare app sent its templated apology and assurance. On the inside, I had a new map of what to do and what to try to do if it ever happened again. I also had the gravity of being someone who'd been in a car that had refused me exit. It's a particular kind of violation, small, mechanical, but enormous in the way it plucks at your sense of consent. By the time these stories start to pile up, you find yourself doing things automatically. I always check the plate now, but that's not a magic bullet. I record snippets when I can. I tell people the make and model before I get in, so someone else knows what to look for. I keep my seatbelt on like armor. I try not to sit in the front. I learned how powerful a neighbor's porch light can be. All small rituals that stitch together to give you a ladder out of fear. And yet, despite all these rules, despite all the practical habits, there's something deeper these stories taught me. That our sense of safety is stitched from other people's small kindnesses as often as it is from anything official. The neighbor who left the door open, the driver who peeled out like a guardian, the dispatcher's measured voice. These are the things that made the edges less sharp. I could tell more. I could give you the neat buttoned-up endings with police reports and follow-ups and the cold corporate replies that make you feel heard but not fully upheld. I could explain how I sent in recordings and copies of the trip and how the platform wrote back in vague timelines and assurances that felt like drafts of concern. But there's a piece of all of this that's not about corporate response. It's about the small decision to put your phone on record, to scream, to kick, to keep a live link open. Those are the bits that matter in the hour when everything else is confusing. There's one more sequence I promised you in the beginning, the haunting mirror image of faces changing, and I will get there. But before that happens, before I take you through the dramatized moment that visualizes the disorientation of being high and vulnerable in the back seat, there's something I need to say about the way we tell these stories. We tell them because they're warnings. We tell them because sometimes the action of someone else changes the course of your night. And we tell them because no template fix exists for the way a single human can disconnect from empathy. Not all drivers are threats. Far from it. Most are ordinary. Most ferry us through small slices of our lives and deserve thanks. The danger comes from a handful of people who use the intimacy of the back seat as license. I'm going to stop here for a second because the next part, the mirror, the faces, the small hallucinatory thing that will be dramatized, needs to breathe in a way the first three stories didn't. It needs to be treated like a small, contained film inside this longer night. An artistic lens on disorientation, not a claim of supernatural reality. When I return to it, I'll mark the scene clearly so you know it's a dramatized visualization, an attempt to render how it felt when the world folded and faces in the glass seemed to shift. For now, hold on to the last image. A woman in the back of a car, fingers fumbling with her phone, a driver's voice like a measured tide, and the sudden, terrible realization that the route has changed and so has everything else. Dramatized visualization of disorientation. On-screen caption, dramatized visualization of disorientation, not a factual event. The rear-view glass was a small rectangle, but it held a whole world. For a few minutes, that felt like 100 heartbeats. The mirror stopped being a mirror and became a stage for the way my mind was ungluing. Faces moved in it like actors in a dream. Mine, doubled and then tripled. A stranger's, smiling too widely. A face with the mole I thought I recognized, then morphing into someone with eyes that were too calm. The dashboard light smeared the edges of everything, turning teeth into bright, harmless ovals and hands into soft shadows. Street lights came and went like camera flashes. The GPS blue path looked wrong. The line thickened and thinned like a heartbeat on paper. I could see myself in that small glass, and I could see the driver in the corner. A profile that was at once ordinary and the sole axis of my fear. His mouth moved, and the words felt distant, like a radio someone had turned low. The faces in the mirror didn't spell anything out. They only did what panic does best. They made small things giant. A blink too slow became suspicion. A smile became an offer. A polite question became a plan. In the dramatized image, the faces shifted faster with every new breath. A girl I used to be, the one who'd laugh at jokes and take edibles because everyone did, floated by and then was replaced with someone who looked older, harder, someone whose eyes cataloged exits and thresholds. The stranger actor's face in the mirror split into two, one kind, one clinical. They both mouthed the same line, and I could only hear the one syllable that kept meaning change: stay. The car's hum turned into a low instrument, like a cello, and the rear view became a score where the notes bent and tugged at me. The harmless details of the inside of the car, a napkin wedged by the cup holder, a tiny tree hanging from the rear view, turned into clues that needed decoding. The pill bottle he'd shown under the seat was suddenly in the corner of the glass, as if it had been placed on my forehead. Then the mirror flared and went black, and with that blackness, the hallucination folded up like a movie reel. The sound of the road returned to its proper volume, and the shapes settled back into the ordinary. I blinked, and the only face I trusted was my own, reflected in a cracked little rectangle that was suddenly just glass. Dramatized visualization ends. On-screen caption displayed throughout. Dramatized visualization of disorientation, not a factual event. I want to be explicit about that scene. It's a creative way to show what it felt like when the edible loosened the edges of reality and left me with a dread that looked like 1,000 faces. It is not an event that happened the way it might have looked in the visual. The faces didn't literally change, but the feeling of not knowing who you were seeing, of not trusting the simplest reflection, is real. That confusion is dangerous because it buys predators time and makes escape something fogged at the edges. After that small cinematic break, the night resumed its ordinary violence. I ran, I screamed, I texted. The neighbor opened the door. The driver idled outside like a question mark until he decided to leave. The app replied with a message template that looked like concern written in outline form. The neighbor made tea, my friend came and sat with me until the caffeine wore off and my pulse matched the world again. Those are the practical endnotes of the story, and they matter because the aftermath is where healing starts. I think about the mirror often, not because of anything supernatural, but because it's an image for a very ordinary truth. When you feel dizzy, the only reliable face you can trust is the one you know belongs to you, and sometimes even that's not enough. That image, that small rectangle in the middle of the car, is where the choice of safety sometimes hides. A quick check of your own expression, a breath, a decision. There's something else that ties these 4 rides together beyond the fear. The way help looked when it came. It was small. It was human. It was a dispatcher's calm voice. It was a neighbor's open door. It was an actual driver who arrived and didn't want a tip so much as to be a witness. It was friends who stayed up on the phone and refused to hang up. Systems matter, the app's complaint protocol, police response, but so do people who respond in the moment. I want to go over what helped me and what other survivors told me helped them, because that's the part of these stories that changes how we leave a bar, a rooftop, a party. I'll say this like I learned it. These are not commandments. They're things that saved us in the narrow, specific ways they could. Your mileage will vary. Use what works for you. First, keep some kind of record. It doesn't have to be cinematic. A 10-second voice memo, a screenshot of the ride details, a live location share, these are small anchors. When the ride felt wrong, I hit record with shaking hands. I don't love the sound of my voice in those files, but the noise became proof that something real had been happening. The platform often asks for timestamps and screenshots. Having them makes reporting simpler. More importantly, it gives you a thread to pull on if you need to. Second, keep someone on the line or in your messages. The friend who listened while I whispered the street names saved more than my ego. There's a pragmatic reason. Someone else's attention is a multiplier. They can call, they can watch a moving blue dot, they can see the car slow and then speed up in a way you can't narrate fast enough. Sometimes the company's system moves too slow. Friends move fast. Third, use your voice even if it feels absurd. Yell if you need to. Make noise. For a long time, I felt guilty about this, like screaming was dramatic. It's not. It's efficient. The thing about predators who count on a passenger's silence is that they plan for opacity. Noise destroys that plan. Sound forces decisions into the open. Neighbors come out, drivers freeze, people look up. It does not make you less reprieve-worthy. It makes you less invisible. Fourth, the 911 dispatcher's instructions in that highway ride were life-saving because they gave something specific to do. Repeat road signs, name of a billboard, wave a hand out the window, smoke a cigarette. These were all small, actionable things that let someone triangulate. If you're ever in that situation, being precise frees the responders to find you. It doesn't make you ridiculous to give them the exact phrase on the billboard or the mile marker. Calm, steady repetition is more useful than panic. Fifth, neighbors and strangers can be the bridge between fear and safety. Lighted porches, open doors, drivers who will ride a little extra to get you somewhere populated. These are unglamorous but critical forms of protection. When I thanked the driver who peeled out like a guardian, I meant a small, real gratitude. It is worth tipping in small ways, leaving a kind review, or sending a thank you message when someone helps. Those gestures fuel the human network that makes night travel survivable. Sixth, report. Even if it feels performative, even if the reply is templated, even if you think nothing will happen. Report to the platform, to local police if there's a crime, and to your close circle. It takes energy, and it often yields a slow, bureaucratic answer. But statistics matter. A pattern matters. If a bad actor is operating, multiple reports increase the chance that someone with the power to remove them will notice. Seventh, don't carry shame about being intoxicated. That's one of the red threads in these stories. The default social reflex to think, I shouldn't have been out, or I should have known better. That weight is not yours to bear alone. Predators count on self-blame. Survivors deserve compassion first and logistical help second. I want to be clear about the platform response because it's part of the pattern. Every one of us who reported got the same kind of message: concern, steps, and a promise of review. Sometimes something came of it. Sometimes the only tangible result was a message in my inbox. Systemic change feels slow, and in the meantime, those templated replies can make you feel seen but not necessarily safe. That discrepancy is real, and acknowledging it isn't anti-platform. It's a call for better systems and faster, more human responses. There's another layer here about how we teach vigilance. It's not a checklist that you can fold into your pocket and forget about. It's a set of habits you practice until they become automatic, but not until you stop feeling the weight of doing them. People told me over coffee, and now I tell you in a few long sentences, that safety habits, checking a plate, sitting in the back, keeping a phone ready, are only half the battle. The other half is the social network that catches you. The person who doesn't answer but keeps the location open, the friend who refuses to hang up, the neighbor who hears noise and comes to the doorway. I also want to say something about shame and rage. We carry both. I had rage at the driver with the molasses drawl who tried to sell me a life plan in the back of a car, at the app that treated my report like a checkbox, at the casualness of men who think a compliment buys entry. I had shame, too, for taking the edible, for stepping into a backseat at all. Both feelings are normal. They don't define you. Use the rage as motive to change your habits, to be louder in reporting, to be gentler with people who survived what you survived. Use the shame to find community that rewires it into something else, solidarity, not isolation. There's a small story that lives between the edges of the other four that I never told because it felt too weirdly ordinary. Months after that night, I was in a coffee shop and overheard someone else telling a rideshare story with the exact cadence I remember having. They were laughing about it, the kind of laugh that hides an exhale of something like fear. I slid into the table beside them and said, "I've been there." We swapped notes for what felt like half a cup of coffee, and I realized then that these scenes are more common than we want to admit. That's why we tell them, not to make everyone afraid, but to make knowledge shareable. If knowing the right small move, to record, to shout, to send a live link, keeps someone else from becoming a story, it has done its job. The platform of these videos is sometimes accused of turning trauma into entertainment. That's a fair criticism. The difference for me is what we do after the story. If this ends with a dramatic anecdote and nothing else, that's worthless. If it ends with people doing small, practical things that make nights safer, friends staying on calls, neighbors leaving lights on, apps improving response time, then the story has become useful. I also want to say something directly to people who drive for rideshare services and watch this. Not all drivers are predators. Most are working, tired, human. Many of the drivers who helped me were not paid in full for their kindness. Their acts were unremarked upon by algorithms. When someone acts like a guardian, tell them, leave a note, report the kindness. Platforms should reward not just timeliness, but stability and emotional safety. If you're a driver and you've ever felt uncertain about a passenger, the right thing often is to call dispatch, to stay where you are, to drive to a lighted area. Goodness is practical. Now, I promised you a short consolidation before the final image, a last set of simple sentences to take into the night. Check the plate. Match the driver's name to the app. Sit in the back if you can. Keep your phone on and share your live location. Record a snippet if you can. Keep someone on the line if you feel unsafe. Use 911. They can often help guide you with specifics. Don't be ashamed. Report the behavior to the platform and to police when appropriate. And finally, trust your gut louder than you trust a smile. When you tell these stories, there will always be someone who says, "That's why I never go out." And there will be someone else who says, "That's why I always go with a friend." Both reactions are human. The balance we try to strike is between living and surviving. We don't want to spend our lives ceding the night to fear. We also don't want to pretend danger isn't real. The best compromise I've found is to make the night slightly more communal. Text your friend, bring a buddy, keep a porch light on for one another. Small acts of shared vigilance make the world safer. Before I close, one last thing about the mirror. The title of this video promised a passenger who kept changing faces in the mirror. If you watched that dramatized part, you know it was labeled and framed as a visualization. I chose to include it because sometimes the internal experience of disorientation needs an external image. The rearview mirror is a tiny piece of glass, but when you're high, exhausted, or terrified, it becomes an entire theater where your doubts play out. That image is meant to make visible the accidental fragility of that moment. Not to suggest anything mystical, just the human mind doing its worst for a second. So, what's left at the end of this long night? For me, it became a different kind of map. Not a map of streets, but a map of steps. Small, ordinary things that add up to safety. The neighbor's porch light, the friend who stayed on the phone, the recording that sat in my phone like a little witness. They are all part of an architecture of safety that is human, not corporate. Before I close, one last thing about the mirror. The title of this video promised a passenger who kept changing faces in the mirror. If you watched that dramatized part, you know it was labeled and framed as a visualization. I chose to include it because sometimes the internal experience of disorientation needs an external image. The rearview mirror is a tiny piece of glass, but when you're high, exhausted, or terrified, it becomes an entire theater where your doubts play out. That image is meant to make visible the accidental fragility of that moment. Not to suggest anything mystical, just the human mind doing its worst for a second. So, what's left at the end of this long night? For me, it became a different kind of map. Not a map of streets, but a map of steps. Small, ordinary things that add up to safety. The neighbor's porch light, the friend who stayed on the phone, the recording that sat in my phone like a little witness. They are all part of an architecture of safety that is human, not corporate. If you have a story like this, small or huge, please share it below. Your note could be the practical clue that someone else needs at 2 a.m. If this helped you feel seen, consider liking and subscribing. It helps us reach people who need these reminders. And more than anything, be gentle with yourself and with the people you love when you talk about these nights. They're not failures. They're hard lessons that teach us how to move through the world a little safer. I'll end with one image that keeps me steady. The rear-view mirror in the morning, when the light is soft and the faces are just faces again. I turn it down, I glance at my own eyes, and I say, quietly, "You're home." It's a small ritual. It costs nothing but attention. And in a world that asks us to trust so many small miracles of technology, sometimes the simplest miracle is recognizing your own face and deciding you're allowed to keep it. Share your story in the comments and help others stay safe. And if this helped, like and share.